Hey guys, in this video I'm going to show you how to knit socks starting from the toe end, so toe up socks. I used to typically knit socks with the starting at the cuff edge of it, working through on the cuff and then the heel and then all the way down to the toe. Now that's really one way to do it, but I think the advantage of doing it starting at the toe end of the sock is that once you know the technique of doing the toe part, you're essentially using that same technique to do the heel part. So really once you know that, you know how to do that, and then the rest of the sock is actually very easy. I would put this technique or this methodology of doing this at an advanced beginner level, just because there's a little bit of wrapping stitches and picking up the wraps that's involved. But I'll show you that step by step, and it's certainly once you know the technique, it goes by really fast and it's simple. So for knitting socks, you do need these kinds of socks, like the one I'm going to demonstrate. You do need double pointed needles, a set of 4 double pointed needles, and whatever your sock yarn is. So I've provided a link down below to a pattern that's I've found on the web for just a very basic toe up sock. So the demonstration I'm doing here kind of follows the same technique as that pattern. So please feel free to go to that website and look at the pattern. That's certainly not my pattern, but I just wanted to demonstrate the technique on how to do the German short rows, or the short rows and the wraps and turns, to try and shape the sock. So before I get started, just wanted to point out that we would essentially be starting the sock at this point, at the point of the toe. And you can see that the sock has 2 parts to it, the front of the sock, or that's on the top of the foot, and then the back of the sock. And so we start knitting it essentially one side, narrowing it down, and then kind of come back and finish the back part. And so to start off, you do need to do a provisional cast on, and cast on the number of stitches the pattern calls for. So I've provided a link below to my video on how to do a provisional cast on. In the interest of time, I'm not going to demonstrate that part here. So what I've done just for this demo is I've cast on 12 stitches, provisionally cast on 12 stitches, and then I've marked my very last stitch that I picked up from that provisional cast on, and then all I've done is I've come back doing a row of purl stitches, and that puts me at this end of the work. Okay, and now we're ready to follow the pattern. So for the very first row, what we're essentially going to do over these next few rows is we are starting at this end and we're slowly decreasing to get to this point. Okay, so we're starting at 12 stitches, and I'm in this demonstration, you'll follow the pattern, whatever the pattern tells you, and I'm going to slowly decrease the stitches to kind of form that descending, that V shape, that decreasing V shape. So for that, we're gonna go all the way across to the second, or to the last stitch. We're not gonna knit the last stitch, we're gonna wrap that stitch, and I'll show you how that's done. So for the very first row, you're knitting up to the last stitch. So I'm just gonna knit 11 of these 12 stitches. And it helps to knit these stitches a little bit loose while you're at this stage. Especially, I'm using bulkier yarn for this demonstration, but if you're using sock weight yarn, the yarn is going to be really, really skinny. And so I would recommend, if this technique is brand new to you, then use a bulkier yarn first, just to maybe practice the technique before you actually work with it in the sock weight yarn. Okay, so we have knit all the way up to this last stitch. Now this last stitch we're not going to knit, we are just going to wrap it. So to do that, since we're knitting, our yarn is in the back, I'm going to actually bring the yarn to the front of that right needle. Then I'm going to slip that stitch purlwise without doing anything to it, and then I'm going to just turn my work to start the next row. But before I do anything to the rest of the stitches, this first stitch, I am just going to slip it back. So hold the yarn like this, okay, and just slip that stitch back to this needle. So now you'll see that my yarn, this is the green, my working yarn, you'll see how it's essentially wrapping around that stitch, right? We've just wrapped that stitch. So now I'm on a purl row. I'm going to purl all the way to the end, to the just before the last stitch, and I'm going to do the same thing that I did here over there. Okay, so remember the yarn is wrapping around that stitch that we just slipped, and we are now just going to purl all the way across. This yarn is a little bit crunchy that I'm using for this demonstration, so you can probably hear the crunch of the yarn. And we are now purling to the last stitch, and now we're going to wrap that last stitch. So to wrap the last stitch, we're on a purl row, so our yarn is in the front, so pretty much the same steps except in reverse. So now I'm actually going to take the yarn to the back. Okay, I'm going to slip this stitch, just insert as if to purl and slip it over, right? And then I'm going to turn my work. And now that brings me back to a knit row. Remember this first stitch we have just wrapped. We're just going to wrap it, okay? We're going to wrap it without doing any work to it. So insert your needle, but make sure your yarn stays underneath that and just slip that stitch over, okay? Or don't even worry about the yarn right now. The yarn is in the front. Just insert your needle and slip it over. But now you're going to knit the rest of these. This is where you have to make sure that the yarn goes underneath it to wrap it. Okay, so we've wrapped that stitch. So just insert it around. And now we're going to do the same thing on this side. We're going to keep knitting, but we've already wrapped this last stitch in the previous row. Now we'll wrap the stitch next to it. So keep knitting. And you can see here, I just wanted to point out, you can see here how we have this wrap, right? That's wrapped this last stitch. So now we're gonna keep knitting till we wrap, keep knitting to the second to last stitch, and then we'll wrap that stitch. So the pattern will tell you to do this just descriptively in the words, the link that I've provided to the pattern that's published online. So this stitch is now the one that we're going to wrap. So we're on a knit row. The yarn is in the back naturally. We're going to bring the yarn front, insert, slip as if to purl, or insert as if to purl, slip it over, and take the yarn back. Okay, turn your work, and now you'll see again how we've essentially wrapped that stitch, right? We slip that back without doing any work to it. Now notice that that first stitch that we wrapped just stays on this needle. It doesn't do anything. Once it's wrapped, it's done for, at least for this part. It just stays there. Then we keep wrapping the stitches next to it row by row. Okay, so now we've wrapped this one. We're going to do the same thing on the purl side. So the knit side is the first row, or whatever. The first time we do it on the knit side. The second time we wrap the stitch at the other end during the purl row. So we're going to purl all the way through to that second to last stitch, and we're going to wrap that. So we're in the purl, bring the yarn to the back, insert, slip it over, turn your work, bring the yarn back so that we have wrapped the yarn, wrap the stitch rather, bring it back, insert as if to purl, and just slip that back. Again, note that this previously wrapped stitch just stays there. Now we've wrapped this one. And so you're just going to keep following this until you have the number of stitches that need to be wrapped on either side per the pattern. So in this case, for this demonstration, I'm going to wrap maybe a couple more stitches on either side so we can see this. So we've wrapped the first two stitches, right? The first wrap, you can see it right here. Here's the second wrap. Now I'm going to wrap this third stitch. Bring the yarn forward, slip it, bring the yarn back so that I have wrapped the stitch, turn my work. I have wrapped the stitch, as you can see, slipping it back, purl all the way through. Oop, missed that one. Okay, purl all the way through to the third stitch. First two are already wrapped. I'm going to wrap this one, Bring the yarn back, turn my work, see how that stitch is wrapped. I'm going to slip him right back, and now I'm going to wrap the 4th stitch from the end on the knit side. So 1, 2, 3, that's the stitch I'm going to wrap right there. So yarn in the front, slip, yarn in the back, that way I've wrapped the stitch, turn my work, slip that stitch back. Notice how the previously wrapped stitches just stay on the needle. Okay, then I'm going to purl on this side, and I'm going to wrap that 4th stitch from the end. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, wrap this guy, yarn back, turn the work, yarn back, slip him. So notice how each one of these stitches is now wrapped. Here's the wrap for one, here's the wrap for the other. Each one of these is now wrapped. Okay, so the pattern will tell you to keep following this or doing this until you have certain number of wraps on either side. So now we have 1, 2, 3, 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4 stitches wrapped on either side. And these 4 would be considered the live stitches, the stitches that are not wrapped. Now this part here, you've noticed how it's formed a nice little triangle. This part is essentially this part. Obviously it looks different here. It looks much smaller since I've only done 12 stitches, whereas here it would have been something like 30 stitches, and following the pattern. But we've done this part. Okay, now we're gonna do the back part where we're starting to increase or expand the work back to that shape. Okay, so to do that, what we do is, remember, 4 stitches wrapped on this side, 4 stitches wrapped on this side. These live stitches, we're just going to keep knitting back and forth on the live stitches, but we're going to pick up wraps on either side. So for that flip side, the first row, you're just going to knit the 4, and actually it might help to put a marker. If you have one of these little markers, it might help to put a marker here, just so you know where your wrap stitches end. And you can do that on either side if you want to. So I'm going to knit these 4 stitches. These are the live stitches. None of these stitches were wrapped, right? These are just your regular live stitches. And I'm going to put another marker here so I know this is where my wrap stitches start. So now I'm at the first stitch at this side that's wrapped, right? So what I'm going to do is, for that stitch, I'm actually going to pick up this wrap. So what you want to do is see where the wrap is, insert your needle into that wrap and put it on to the left needle. Okay, we'll see that one more time. I'm going to drop it. So find the wrap, insert your needle underneath the wrap, and insert the left needle, essentially slip it onto the left needle. Now you'll notice there's 2 stitches there. There was the original stitch that was wrapped, and now this little piece of wrap that I've actually picked up. So now I'm going to knit both of those stitches together. So insert your needle through both stitches. And sometimes this can be a little bit difficult. This is why it helps, if you're a loose knitter at this point, it actually helps to insert the stitch, but essentially insert it through the front loops of both those stitches and knit. So we've just now picked up that wrap and we've knitted along with the stitch. Now the next stitch, we're still going to wrap that one before we turn our work. So yarn forward. Remember, we're on a knit row, so bring the yarn forward, insert or as if to purl, and slip the stitch and wrap. So now you'll notice that this stitch actually has 2 wraps. It has its original wrap that we had done, and now we've just given him a second wrap. And that's exactly what we want to do. Flip it over, slip him back. Remember, he's a wrap stitch, so we're just slipping him right back as before. And now I'm going to purl all the way through. I'm just going to slip that marker and purl all the way through to get to that first wrap stitch on the purl side. And the purl side can be a little bit more challenging because it's easy to see the wrap it's easy to see that wrapped stitch. It's easy to see the wrap on the knit side, or this right side rather than on the wrong side, but you can see it. If you look for it, you'll find it. So just like there, we had picked up the wrap on that side, we're going to do the same thing on the purl side. We're going to take this wrap, we're going to pick it up, and we are going to put it onto the needle. And now we're going to knit or purl both of these together. So insert into the front loop of both stitches and just purl those two stitches together. And we're still going to re-wrap this next stitch. So bring the yarn back. Remember, we're on the purl side. The yarn is naturally forward, so bring it back. Slip that next stitch, turn the work, bring the yarn back, slip that stitch back. And again, now it has two wraps, just like the previous stitch. Okay. Now we do the same thing again, but this time we're gonna go up to this stitch. Okay, so I'm gonna now knit back. So we've already picked up the wrap from that fourth stitch, right? The last one at this end that we had wrapped. We had picked up the wraps here and we had double wrapped this stitch. So this stitch, there's nothing to be done with this one. We're just gonna knit him. But now the stitch that has the double wraps, we're gonna pick up the double wraps. Okay, so not just picking up one wrap, but picking up both wraps. So here's both wraps. I've inserted my needle through both wraps. I'm gonna slip them on to my left needle, and now I have 3 stitches that I have to knit together. And here's where it can be a little bit tricky, and you may have to use your muscles and use a little bit of force to get your needle in there and knit all 3. Okay, I'm gonna try that one more time. There we go. And this is feels a little bit harder because it's with bulkier yarn, and I tend to knit a little bit on the tighter side, but there, we've knit those together. Okay, and now remember, we still have to wrap this guy. So yarn forward, slip, yarn back, turn your work, slip it back. Okay, and now I'm going to purl all the way through. Slip the marker. This stitch was already worked, nothing to do with that, right? The 4th stitch from the end, we're just going to purl that one. And here, this was the one that now has 2 wraps. You can see wrap 1 and wrap 2, right? 2 wraps. We're going to pick both wraps up, but we're going to do it from the purl side. So here's the first one, here's the second one. I'm just going to find them, insert my needle between both wraps, transfer them over to this needle, and then purl all 3 together. Oh, there we go. And then we re-wrap this guy. And that's it. And so you'll keep doing that, going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, till you have your little toe part of the sock. So once you've done that, you will take off the provisional cast on and pick up the stitches from the provisional cast on. Again, you can look at my provisional cast on video that shows you how to do that part. And at that point, you're ready to continue. At that point, your sock will essentially be done. This part of your sock will be done. You will then be continuing on to the main part of the sock, the main foot of the sock rather. And then once you get to the heel part, you'll essentially do the same exact thing like we've done here. And if you look at the pattern, again, follow the pattern. The pattern will tell you how many stitches to pick up or how many stitches to wrap on either side when you're doing the heel. But you'll essentially doing the same thing for the heel and following on through. So right there, that was the technique on how to do the short rows. One of the ways to do a short row wraps and turn pickup for the toe up sock. I hope you give this one a try, and if you have any questions or comments, please leave me a comment in the comments box. And if you would like to see more videos or have suggestions, please subscribe to my channel, Knittycat's Knits, and I wish you all happy knitting. Thank you for watching.